Caroline Bergvall, writer and artist of French-Norwegian background based in London, works across art forms, media and languages. A strong exponent of writing methods that emerge from multilingual, audiovisual and contextual concerns. Projects include poetic works, audio pieces, drawings, installations and live performances. Recipient of many awards, she presents her work in its many forms internationally. Book outputs include Drift 2014, Middle English 2011, Fig 2005, a catalogue Middling English 2010, a DVD of installations Ghost Pieces 2011. Her most recent collaborative performance is an outdoor sunlight performance for two voices and a chorus of multiple languages, Ragadawn, with Gavin Bryars, premiered in September 2016, and this will tour in the summer of 2017. Her previous much acclaimed performance, Drift, opened Poetry International in 2014 London. Most recent fellowship, a Mellon Collaborative Fellowship, Gray's Centre for Art and Inquiry, University of Chicago 2016. I should say I was able to see Drift down in Southend, I think. We got on a bus which picked us up outside of outside of Whitechapel Art Gallery. Yeah. And it was really fantastic. And I'm so pleased that you're able to come and speak to us today about that work. So I think it's very important.
So how do you want to do it? Do you want to do it?
I can press the...
You press play?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Which
and then,
word would you like? So they're all in here.
Yeah. Let me just prepare myself and then we'll just let this.
Okay.
Can I just... Hi. I thought I would bookend. I'm very pleased to be here. I think the themes that have been already sort of announced and put in the room by Marina and Steve are really sort of important at the moment where we are, I think, many of us wondering how to continue with practice and with thinking. And I've been sort of showing, performing and talking about Drift for a few years now. It's had a few manifestations. But it is, in a way, so far the most finished in relation to my questions. So I thought I would sort of open with a short film that was made of some of the materials of the performance Drift, and I can talk to that afterwards. And then I thought I would end the talk with a few minutes from this new performance, Ragadawn, which is not fully articulated in many ways. It takes so long to get to perhaps the wider points of one's work, but I think where all the questions of the work are announced and are already in the work. So it's a pleasure for me to present that. In the meantime, I have some things that I'd like to say. So can we play Shake? This is it. So this is the... Yeah. Can you make it full screen? Yeah, and then music. Yeah, perhaps turn around.
Getid alla gaze guesses all Adur gang I fram, others go forward Schooners shooting on schooners shooting and shattered. Viu witness that vita certain way. What unwise is that being? What is uncertainty? Sitya, flatty, beauty, six by fleeting eyes, fire. Elders of berries, oak, sorry, seeds, sooner side, up, seeing matter house, better alive than unalive, up, not lost at life, and with lust for life. Elders of berries, oak, sooner seed, soda side, seeing matter house, up. Room was busy, the living world noisy, crowding out the place. Dead were marching through, no one was paying attention. That's when I started to shake. That's when I started to squawk, push, sharken, agitate, churn, skaken. That's when I started to shake. Vi ovisst är att vita, what unwise but uvene är att vi, each on wisdom, sitja att flätti fy. That's when I started to shake. Up, shakes. Up, and the shaking, when the shaking starts. What's the same place? What's the same place? What's the same place when the shaking shakes? Up, shake.
That's just a little quote from the. So how do you? So, we can turn on the light. It's like this is going to be very tiring. Yeah. Okay. So what I was playing there is the final section of this performance, which lasts for about an hour and 20 minutes, something like that. And I wanted to show it because this is a live cut. So basically, what you see when you are in the room is that you see the musician that I'm working with, Inga Zak, who's a percussionist, Norwegian percussionist. The digital text you see there has been developed by a digital artist called Thomas Köppel and myself on voice and on the text. But what was interesting to me in showing this today, apart from the presentation of Drift, is this idea of moving language about. So the way we were operating with this structure here is very much as a sort of moving constellation or as navigation or as ways by which the words sort of find other points of magnetism, if you like, and start setting up perhaps other types of connection. So usually you can actually get to read or discern some of the texts that are there. Today it's less clear, because of of the screen. And that is an interesting aspect for me as well, is that you view, but you also read, yeah? So that you can come to a point of reading, and you will never be able to read the full mass that is there, and that is also part of the point. Yeah? But this project, and there's another, sort of way, therefore, of thinking about this Words on the Move, which is also what I increasingly like to think about as a transhistoric process. Because the text that I was singing and reading here is a sort of very loose translation from one of the Old Norse foundational texts, the Håvamål, which is an Odinic text. And I sort of took some of that text as part of this research that I'll go a little bit more into, and did a sort of loose translation of some of the opening lines of the text. So that it sort of claims an archaism of the poetic delivery as well. It claims an archaism of the presence of the poet, or the poetic transmissions, in fact, that you were saying, Steve. And it all started really with this sign here. I stumbled across this sign, as one does, an obsolete letter, runic and Anglo-Saxon line, the thorn sign, which is now only active in Irish and Icelandic, unreadable in most others, or readable only as an indexical marker, the mark of an ancient or dead language. The initiatory qualities of tripping, because I literally tripped into that sign and then was thinking about that hook at the top of that sign, which allowed me to start developing ideas around nothingness and also around pinging and tripping, which became the motif of that first piece for Drift, which is the idea of no ping, which allowed me slowly to be thinking through a type of ignorance, or willful ignorance, to be using... I've exceeded... So I haven't even started yet, so that's the... So it allowed me to literally quite playfully move with this idea of my own ignorance, my associative knowledge, to take in the freedom of a type of associative knowledge, using the sign in its figurative shape of a P, and then developing this piece, no ping. It's a fine day in Fancy Group. Nothing at all. A P attached to a long stick or a type of hoop. This stone letter became a sign of absence and of disappearance. I tripped some more over his protruding root and fell deeper into historic soils, deep, nightmarish matter, dreamlike consciousness. Signing off on absence was bringing up all sorts of ghosts, charting a course through ancient historical, Anglo-Saxon and Irish sea poetry, medieval travel documents and Viking sagas, inevitably took place more or less in parallel with the news of an ill-fated crossing of migrants across the Mediterranean Sea's political waters, a disaster that came to be known as the Left to Die boat case of April 2011, which was one of the first of many now to make international headlines. Okay, so I've now been blocked out of them. Yeah, that's great. So this was a photo that was taken by what we think is a French aircraft and was circulated and was then picked up also by the press, because this, as you will see from the way I'm keeping on telling the story, this was one of those small zodiacs where people were left to perish at sea, although under the intense surveillance of an enormous amount of military personnel. Developing the various poetic languages of Drift, the piece, it was dauntingly clear how ancient literary journeys were being echoed in the harrowing and unsung, unwillingly documented disasters of contemporary crossings, such as the Left to Die boat case. Distinctions between present, future, and past times were challenged. History functions as a complex time loop. It can dredge up events seemingly wild apart by running them through a very fine sieve. An implicit notion of poetic time was put to work. Open vibratory chains of linguistic connection between historic and contemporary languages was set up. So between me trying to learn Anglo-Saxon without wanting to learn it, because by then I was working through the seafarer, and I was thinking about the stone sign of the seafarer, and thinking about the quest poetry of this anonymous 10th century poem, and then thinking also about here these trajectory, the current trajectory, and how you can find through a type of associative knowledge and also the willingness to be ignorant, how you can put things together. Verbal, so working as a writer, let me see, so here we go, that. I sort of have often, this was part of an installation for another piece that deals with disappeared human beings based around the shibboleth. This was a massacre that took place in 1937 in Haiti, and it's a piece called Say Parsley. And some of you will know it because of that poem that was made very famous by Rita Dove. I made an installation out of it in which I was questioning the fact that the shibboleth is really, if this was just after 2001, so really questioning the way the shibboleth was making a return through the way you speak, through your accents, so that borders are being set up and were being set up in the way you speak and the way you listen to others, that you are assuming identity, and that can be, in the worst case of the shibboleth, a murder or something that will lead to your murder. So I was working with that notion of murderous language, murderous listening when I was working with Say Parsley, which again is perhaps the first piece where I really explicitly move into performance and installation to be thinking about, as a writer, to be thinking about language and the absenting of language, which also leads to the absenting of actual bodies. I think what this conference, this day of work, how does one address these disappearances, that are, pushing at the moment so much into questions of political participation and poetical artistic work? And I think this is some of the things that we are, wanting to address here. So, for a few years, I used this ampersand, this sign, again, because you cannot speak the ampersand. You can only see it. It doesn't speak in the alphabetical system. It's an index, it's a sign. So as an icon, it's quite an interesting element. It can only show itself, yeah? And I was sort of thinking about notions of hyphenations. Working as a writer in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary fashion, what I have in the past called hyphenated practice, is reflective of my interest in multiple languages, in the power relations between languages, in thinking about language across various modes of literacy, literarity, and experientiality. A lot of my recent work is engaged in thinking about how languages cohabit, survive, are prohibited, become dominant, infiltrate, or irremediably dominate one another, not only on a syntagmatic axis, in geopolitical proximities, but also paradigmatically by virtue of deep vertical drops into etymologies, syntactical development, or other transformative surges of change within the language's history. This crossing into a range of language soils, and in the work that I'm doing now, Ragadan, I talk a lot about, or I've started to think about linguistic soils. In other sort of pieces that I've written, I think a lot about archaeology. So things one can say, like the stone sign, which is somehow rescued for my practice at that point, if you like, and then thrown back out into the Medno, into the pool of its actual history. This crossing into a range of language sources and environments by way of artistic processes is a way of pushing at questions of power and translatability, of voicing and ghosting, of being and remembering, of empathizing, sympathizing, and stripping bare. But on this occasion, it asked for more, perhaps, than I had bargained for. The more inter- or transdisciplinary my method had become with drift, and the more they pressed against borders of knowledge, of practice, and of suffering. Yeah, this is a piece that I just wanted to bring in because it's such a beautiful piece and such an interesting and powerful piece from 1993 by a Scottish poet based in America. She's also a performance writer, does a lot of sort of work which is connected to theatrical practices. She's called Fiona Templeton. This is a piece called Cells of Release from 1993. She locked herself into this abandoned Eastern Penitentiary in Philadelphia and decided to cover the entire corridor of this abandoned panopticon with, as you can see, these cotton sheets. And she would sort of, her rule was that she had to literally keep on writing on this cotton sheet. So she would sew, on those tiny strips as she would be continuing to write. And inside the different abandoned grim cells that you can see there, this was a collaboration with Amnesty International. She had put up the photograph of a then actual prisoner of conscience, encouraging the visitors to write a letter, which is the principle of Amnesty International, to that prisoner of conscience, to take up the act of writing. And as the weeks were going by in that prison, her writing and her perception of herself inside that space and her perception of the value of what she was doing as a poet in this abandoned space was hitting her more and more. So this is a really very powerful text of, you see the performer in activity of writing, trying to work their way in a fairly naked way through this environment, with also the Amnesty International admonition that you will hand your pen over to somebody else. Somebody else will write, and they will write to, if you like, actual lives that are currently in prison. And seeing the questioning of her artistic practice through it. Here I am imprisoned in this. I imprison myself in this prison, and why am I doing that? And also understanding the way her body was changing through the cold, through the fear, through the sense of the difficulty of artistic practice. So this is a piece. That book, Cells of Release, is available through Roof Books. It was recently republished. So Roof Books from New York, Cells of Release. It's a really beautiful book. You have the entire text, and then you have a lot of these photographs. So where am I now? I sort of developed ways of trying to think about drift. And because there were a number of things that I'm keen to keep on pursuing, that I think is often the way that I work, is that I accumulate different types of research or different types of discourse. So here you have the archaeological item, which is that thorn sign, which somehow is a drop. It allows a way in into material that I know culturally, but that I know linguistically very little about. The medieval quest poem is a seafarer that I then proceeded to rewrite into 16 songs that are the meat of drift from a poetic perspective, and that are retracing through different types of travel, a sort of a poetic quest. Yeah. And then you have the scientific research for the Left to Die migrant boat case, which I'll go a little bit into it because I think it's interesting for our purposes here, what these scientists are doing, how they were able to piece together this Left to Die boat case. And then the personal trajectory. And this is an aspect of drift which is very present inside the volume itself, and which I very rarely, I have realized, talk about in my talks. And yet it's an aspect of it which has become very important for me in relation to thinking about loss, being lost, and thinking about directionality or navigation. And it has to do with queer citizenship. So it has to do with the fact of being part of a type of citizenship which is, until recently, it only provides a second-class type of citizenship. So you are sort of always ghosted in your culture. There's aspect of the culture where you are sort of hidden, you are hiding, and you are ghosted. So when you have the possibility through law to, for example, enter into civil partnerships, then you are suddenly finding that your possibility of a citizenship is sort of extended into a full range of citizenship. It seems to me, therefore, that queer citizenship is a really powerful way of thinking about what citizenship is actually becoming. And there's a lot of pressure being put in relation to questions of migrancy, in relation to questions of residency. And when you have citizenships that are made already through social pressure, then you also have a way of thinking beyond the national borders, through the national borders, the rethinking of membership into that community. So, but ironically, it's something that is very clear in the book, but that I don't often talk about, and I think it's because I'm still trying to understand the bounds of this. If you talk about it, often there's an identificatory tag that happens. What interests me is this idea of the dynamics of positioning. How you position yourself or your work primarily in relation to certain types of dynamics so that you are uncovering or you are piecing together or you are reassembling, rather than it being a sort of finalized point of static. So I thought that, so the personal and the idea of love and being lost trajectory, which is very strong in Drift, this idea of bringing in autobiographical or personal material inside archaeological material, inside political material, is a very important sort of aspect of this work. So very perhaps quickly here, because I do want to move on to this idea of the forensic architecture. These are sort of ways of thinking about the making of the work and the handling of different research elements that have been sort of useful to me, and perhaps more and more the idea of navigation. So the idea of being on a raft and navigating, or being unable to navigate, or finding ways to navigate. I do that then through, like I was saying, in relation to the poetics, of different types of translations that are either close to the text or close to processes of language, crossing, if you like. This work, Drift, is also a great number of pieces. It's a performance, and I showed you, I played you some aspects of it. It's this book in which I compile a number of discursive strategies as well as drawings, as well as photographic material. It's also, and I'll show you now, been some visual shows of prints and some of the drawings. And it is, I think I mentioned that performance as well. So there's a great number of ways by which I'm trying to address the issue brought on by this idea of working with very ancient material in collision, in conflict, and in sympathy with these current disastrous crossings that we are seeing around us. So, just very quickly, some of the prints that I have developed. As you can see, these are prints where the text is available to the viewer if the viewer moves around the print itself. And that is part of the poetic material that is inside the poetic aspect of the seafarer inside of Drift. Other pieces, another piece here, these are 4 sail songs. This was just shown in Geneva. Now there's another one here. As you can see, the text buried into pigment, very, very light metallic pigment that we're burying in there. And then this is, I wanted to show you this because that is literally finished this morning. How do I get out to come back in afterwards?
Yeah.
Press a little.
No, the other one. So
There?
that'll do. I think.
Yeah.
No. I'm not good at explaining.
Oh yeah, okay, great. So, this is the final one. That is bronze, black and blue, with this idea of constellation. I will take you through the constellations later on, which is the full stops and the place names. And it is also the first page of the, let me see if I can go down, the first page of the report that I use in the work. And that's being shown now. Again, this idea of having to circulate around the work in order to access it. So how do I get out of this now?
Just the cross.
Just a little cross.
Yeah.
And then I can take you to the constellations. These are wall murals. But actually they are based on the drift modeling of this little rubber boat as it was making its way towards Lampedusa, and through the storm and loss of fuel started drifting back down again. Many people died on this boat, and what has been very powerful about it is that the scientists, the researchers through which I have been able to piece together some of my own, if you like, versions of constellations, for example, is the way they have been working to try and trace up this drift. Yeah. And this is where I'm thinking there might be something there for artistic practice as well in relation to processes of witnessing. This is a zodiac constellation based on, again, the measuring and the piecing together of the rubber boat that made the crossing, with one of the survivors speaking to one of the researchers. And then this is the one that I just showed you, the Ghost Dust constellation, which is the first part of the report as it was pieced together by the researchers after interviews with the survivors. So they were piecing together all the elements. And the report also contained a lot of digital mapping that they had been able to piece together by picking up on the surveillance equipment that had actually the material to its availability, was not releasing it, was not saving or rescuing. It is through their work that this case was able to get to the courts so that there would be an awareness of this case, yeah? So sorry. Creating methodological relays of activities when attempting to peer into other epochs or lives through their material signs seem to me to be far more powerful than humbling a reminder of one's place in the layers and times of the world. Transhistoric work provides its own forms of contemporary engagement. It generates an actual friction between historic investigation and contemporary witnessing. A palpable connection is made between archaeological work and forensic investigation, between investigating ancient drama at their sometimes poetic residues and piecing together current crimes from unyielding signs at the scene. Making a poetic or artistic narrative out of researching elements of literary, visual and material or media culture until it yields a poetic structure to contain it all. In such a way, the cohabitation of materials becomes close to an analogy with geology or with archaeology. It also makes me think about Said's contrapuntal ways of thinking about the cohabitation and the, if you like, the friction and cohabitations of elements. The methodologies of the Left to Die boat report, which brought the case to widespread political attention, were developed by the research group Forensic Architecture at Goldsmiths University. And I want to just show you some. Oops. So that's stupid. Here we go. This is part of their own brief. This very group of researchers has been dealing with a whole range of violent acts, harmful and unlawful, engineered and hidden by states. Both their fieldwork and their findings analysis are inherently interdisciplinary and collaborative. They use human testimonies, on-the-ground interviews, as well as the most contemporary digital modeling and spatial technologies from tools often used by maritime and military forces to reconstruct the events they are examining. As they themselves describe it, forensic architecture, or forensic oceanography in this case, refers to the presentation of spatial analysis within contemporary legal and political forums. The project undertakes research that maps, images, and models sites of violence within the framework of international humanitarian law and human rights. Through its public activities, it situates forensic architecture within broader historical and theoretical contexts. So this is the main question asked by one of its founders, the architect Ansel Franke. What happens to the era of witness when the crime is no longer visible to unmediated human perception? What happens when the evidence has been made untraceable? Will the era of scientific model come to replace human testimony in adjudicating humanitarian claims? Like forensic researchers, the point is to make the made unseen, the anonymous dispersed mass, as a value one must urgently tackle, including the activist symbolic and creative levels. And there's a wonderful book that I brought in today by Rob Nixon called Slow Violence and the Environmentalism of the Poor. Slow violence is this violence which one cannot put one's finger on, a type of violence where you do not know how to measure the casualty. And this is so much what we're dealing with. So I thought, that was an interesting book to bring in. He says here, Rob Nixon, to address violence discounted by dominant structures of apprehension is necessarily to engage the culturally variable issues of who counts as witness. Contests over what counts as violence are intimately entangled with conflicts over who bears the social authority of witness, which entails much more than simply seeing or not seeing. And earlier in the chapter, he also was pointing to this idea of who counts as a casualty. How do we bring home and bring emotionally to life threats that take time to wreak their havoc, threats that never materialize in a spectacular, explosive cinematic scene? Apprehension is a critical word here, a crossover term that draws together the domain of perception, emotion, and action. To engage, and this is him, to engage slow violence is to confront layered predicaments of apprehension, to apprehend, to arrest, or at least mitigate often imperceptible threats requires rendering them apprehensible to the senses through the work of scientific and also imaginative testimony. His point in the book is very much how do we take some of the work created, put together by scientists, activists, for new types of activism in arts practice, if you like. A quote I use as epigraph to one of my earlier pieces impresses itself on his comments. This is a quote that stems from Christa Woolf's Medea, which is a very profound transhistoric meandering and anti-nuclear work. A very powerful work, again, really mixing up the discursive levels. Do we let ourselves go back to the ancients, or do they catch up with us? No matter. An outstretched hand suffices. Lightly they cross over to us, our strange guests who are like ourselves. We hold the key that unlocks all epochs. Sometimes we use it shamelessly, darting a hasty glimpse to the crack of the door, keen on quick, ready-made judgments. Yet it should also be possible to get closer, a step at a time, awed by the taboo, unwilling without great need to wrest away a secret from the dead. And she closes, confessing our need, we should begin with that. Confessing our need, we should begin with that. I was just having in mind also a film that many of you I'm sure have seen, The Sergeant for the Light. I don't think there's time to play a section from it now. But again, it is a piece that pieces together astronomical events in relation to the disappearance of so many Chileans during the Pinochet dictatorship and the horrific sort of aspects of the way they were sort of buried and thrown out in the desert, in which some of these astronomical experiments are also taking place. So again, a very strong way of thinking about the piecing together of very sort of potentially disparate discourses, disparate knowledge fields, in order to be thinking about how do you make visible, how do you think, how do you make seen. And I was thinking about Barbara Hepworth. You were talking about the United Nations. We have a different sense of the United Nations we have when she was sort of operating with it. This is her single form at the Foundry, and this is a single form as it was being launched at the United Nations. And I just had a small, a beautiful quote from her here, where she describes the reconciliation of form and materials with politics. That was always very much forward in her mind, and that her abstract forms are integrative and always motivated. She says, "The heroic is death to me. It is beyond the comprehension of a human being. Something big demands one's bodily acceptance." And then I brought this quote, because you could think, when you see this, you think, wow, so this is this a heroic shape? It certainly is beyond human dimension. However, the way she then talks about it. "You have made a striking symbol of Hammarskjöld's far-sightedness and integrity. But the nature of this abstract shield must exclude any more personal feelings for him." And she responds, "Surely not. There is the totally expressive texture, don't you see? Naturally, I had assistance to weld the great sections together, but the whole surface is worked over with my impress of affection. You can't actually feel it up there by hand, in the way you can pass your hand over my smaller carvings and feel the subtleties and sensuousness of the surfaces. Still, the scale is just right for the spectator's eye to pick on this expressive surface texture and pass the message to the heart." The valuing of the senses of perception and of emotion for current thinking and current artistic practice is kept very firm throughout Hepworth's work and is an important point of rehabilitation for today. We become so accustomed to algorithmic thinking, trusting primarily scientific facts, feeling one's smallness at overwhelming newsreels, as well as the implicit alienating knowledge of constant surveillance, that we forget to trust the singularized impact of affect and the liberatory value of the imaginary in one's relation to materials and engagement. This seems to move the involvement necessary for contemporary witnessing to a sense of interdependency and from empathy to sympathy, from an ethical and important feeling for to a differently committed feeling with, an intimate understanding of one's life and immediate presence in the chain of events, whatever the remove. This is the need one could seek to understand, accept, and work from. So this is also an aspect of the work, which is here in black and white, but this is the work that I did with this photographer. Seeking to create a temporally complex matter of past and present text to compose and reconstitute the sea loss of drift means that acts of witnessing need to stretch across times and epochs and media, looking for the voices as signals of current disappeared passengers gave voice as sign to lost apparitions from the past. As the forensic oceanographers remark, these technologies do not simply create a new representation of the sea, but they constitute a new sea altogether, one which is simultaneously composed by matter and medium. So I invited the photographer Tom Martin, who's a photographer who works primarily in sites and lands of conflict, and is a documentary photographer, and I invited him to reflect on this image that I was showing you that has been so widely circulated, the image of the zodiac at the start of their journey. Tom has worked as a photographer. The question I ask of him is how one might unpack visually the cruel scandal that this image, the above image of the zodiac, revealed and the way it was circulating, and what is about to take place. How can one imagine and hold visually the memory and the reality of these passengers beyond morbid voyeurism? How can one activate inquisitiveness and connection, not only in a forensic, but also in an experiential way, so that seeing can be radically slowed down, and the viewing of the news item can be experienced as material, opaque, inescapable, a trace of absurd and shade life as material. And he developed this series of macro images, which each seek to respond to this call. They are unreadable, yet potentially decipherable. They remove representation from the viewing, yet the intense colors bring a peculiar sense of rawness and fragility. Not being entirely sure of what I'm looking at makes me feel afraid of what is perhaps hiding here. These images open up the viewing process to analysis and associative perception, while also detecting other media traces at the heart of the image. As you can see, the little yellow dots there are actually small markers from the printer itself, which are location sensors. So that when he was sort of blowing up the image more and more and moving more and more into the image, what also appeared were the location sensors of his own printing process. Okay, I just wanted to, there's another thinker that I've been using perhaps more explicitly, which is Michel de Certeau, and I just wanted to perhaps mention him here because of his work around infra-elements. The work of French historian Michel de Certeau is relevant here. His approach is often that of a tracker of verbal remainders, material smudges, fugitive collective tracks, or lapses, as he calls them, which interrupt the smooth functioning of the authoritative text within inscriptive culture. In his work, there's a struggle to make voices and bodily presences seep through the official and eradicating stamp of the omniscient history machine. So I think he's great in relation to the idea of the local and how you detect those different voices within those texts, and that you have that in the practice of everyday life. The voice insinuates itself into the text as a mark, a trace, an indiscreet ghost, a metonymy of the body. This is a notion which I also keep close to Duchamp's fugitive and potent idea of the infrathin, which is a performative friction of bounds between objects in motion, where the inner and outer spaces are some of Rachel Whiteley's negative objects. Small, seemingly unimportant, or simply illegible elements turn out to be disturbing and revelatory because they do not seem to belong, or because they belong exceedingly to a situation. They point to an interiority that is not fully traceable, yet is entirely contained in the text or the object's intrinsic matter. They rub against the reading and the viewing process. They actualize what is gone in embedded and performative ways, like indistinct spores or lingering after images. They call up unexplored, disallowed parts of ourselves and our unshared histories. And this reminded me of this idea of an excavatory imagination, if you like, which I've been sort of, trying to talk about here. It reminded me of this wonderful American poet, Susan Howe, who's always been working also through historical elements, and who said, "I wish I could tenderly lift from the dark side of history voices that are anonymous, slighted, inarticulate." So reclaiming the experience of singular lives alongside larger collective investigations provokes a pendular effect between far and close, and this can favor various kinds of sympathetic identification at both a personal and a collective level. And it can lead to modes of memorialization that create new directions for artistic and personal engagement. And the last thing I wanted to say was, because I've been talking a lot today about the research, the different ways of thinking about how can I use the different types of discourses to get at the work in an artistic way without losing elements on the way. Yeah. How can I represent, or how can I find a way of piling on these different elements so that in the different setups where I'm showing the work, you can feel that conflict, you can feel the situation that has been erased. You can feel the language that is based on other languages. Yeah. So today I was quite keen, because of the theme of what we're working on, to be thinking more about those types of, basically the methods that get to the work, that allow perhaps the making of work. In my case, allowed me the making and the thinking of drift without sort of, But there's just one more thing that I want to say, which is this idea of performance. Because a lot of what I do is based or has performance in it. I do a lot of readings, and then with this performance drift, and then the performance raggadon and other performances, there's often the live element of voicing in the work. So I just wanted to sort of, I'll show you this time, to show the little raggadon thing. But literally just to talk about performance. Because in a way, it's the idea of performance, or the fact of performance, which keeps me, as an artist and as a writer, the most connected to the physical intimacy around the research and the stories that I'm faced with, or that I stumble upon, or that I'm seeking to recreate in order to tell. So that can be very people-consuming and very task-consuming. Set up collaborative performances like I do is a full year's work, just to get that machine going, that work going. And in so doing, you move into totally new skills, new ways of learning about language, learning about music, learning about the other elements. But there is one aspect of performance which I have been doing for Drift, which is that I, in the dark, in the middle of Drift, read from this report. And it's a sort of very naked moment. I'm not going to read that now, but I just want to read you the reason why I end up in the middle of this poetic universe, bringing straight up the report that is the story of these migrants who did not make it, and yet whose story was told by those who have made it, and the researchers who've taken the time to be able to know how to piece it together. So the forensic principle that every action or contact leaves a trace. I decide to use the narrative of the journey and its harrowing drift, the story told by the survivors and corroborated by the forensic findings inside the performance. My role will be to read the narrative and relay the report's complex piece of memorialization, interpretation, and investigation through live recitation. To register the event by recitation, letting the recitation become a resonating chamber, a ripple effect. Insistent methods in art are intimately connected to processes of receiving and of following. One loads one's vessel for dream travel, and one follows it into hell. A reciting voice remains simultaneously input and output. It is archaic, its resonance and its contact ripple. Everything is connected in the vast chamber of the world, beyond the callous, brutal politics. Everything ripples at contact. And I think this idea of standing and performing and this live moment, that moment, is also something to do that it connects back to what I was saying about this very archaic dimension of the way we transmit. So that's also this sort of nakedness of presenting work in this way is something that has been of great interest to me, and that I think you'll see in this very short clip. It's 4 minutes long that I'm going to show you of Raggadon. I'm not going to talk about Raggadon particularly. It is a project in the making. It has premiered now this September. In fact, again, Southend, so it must be where my English performances start now. When hit the estuary, bang, let's perform. So that's why we did it. And a very beautiful festival, Estuary Festival, that literally is a biennial festival, just opened this year. And where the theme, of course, of migration, refugees is very strong, since we were performing on Tilbury Docks, where the Windrush arrived, and where many migrants and migrant communities and refugees have been arriving over the many decades. So I want to show, and I don't think I'm going to talk about this work particularly, and I'll literally perhaps let you enjoy that. It takes 5 minutes, and it's literally a performance which lasts for about at the moment an hour, and we invite you to come and join us just as the sun comes up. So this year was 7:30 a.m. and about 150 came and joined us, which was not an easy travel. Again, a coach from London, and you'll see what we try and do. And at the end of it, which you won't see there, we offer breakfast. And that gesture of hospitality is really important to all of us because we're cold and tired, but it's also great because of this idea of how do we then take on a conversation and move it on elsewhere. You also hear different languages that are represented here, and that's part of what I'm trying to think about with different types of languages that are inhabiting the linguistic souls, if you like, of where we perform. So you'll hear Punjabi, because there's very strong Sikh community in the southern area, so I interviewed some Punjabi speakers, and you'll hear some Romansh, because we were also performing in Geneva, and that is the fourth national language in Switzerland, and it is, if you like, one of those disappearing languages, and like many disappearing languages, through the arrival of Portuguese communities, there's a strong connection, it turns out, between Portuguese and Romansh. Suddenly there's a revitalization of Romansh in Switzerland through these Portuguese communities. So that political aspect of language, if you like, languages as part of the dawn chorus is also very much part of the work, although you might hear it less. So let me now play this. Can we turn off the light, perhaps? The sound is not the best, it's been compressed and weird, but the images are great.
Sweetheart, oh my love, weeping. If you wake up and you're weeping, weep until you're empty, until you're completely empty.
It is hot, yeah. Maybe we can open a window.
Hello, Steve. Well, he's got here as the non-formal.
Yeah, I think it's running really close. It sounds desperate to go, and I had to put on my phone to write it, so, but I hope someone used them. Did you go to it on the coach?
No, I didn't get to this one.
It was like a 5
I went to
a.m.
like one I could do it. Well, I used to go 5 years ago. You don't
Right,
get
as well.
some stuff on the park,
Yeah.
I've got
Yeah, okay. Do you want me to? Okay.
Okay, so that's what we're doing, and then we'll be interrupted if anything, we'll just do our discussion rather than something.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. So should I go and try that? Yes, right. No, anyway. So, does everybody?
So I think if we have to really see now, then we have to pressure on. Just wait 1 or 2 seconds.
Yeah, okay, great.
Okay, I think we'll make a start again. We're just going to watch the end of Caroline's film, and then instead of having questions now, Camilla will come and speak, and then we'll do the kind of questions and answers as a kind of panel, as it were. And then if the coffee comes, then it's only interrupting our conversation rather than someone's presentation. So, yeah.
Great. So, as you can hear, the sound is not so good, but it still gives, I think, a little bit of a sense of this work. So, let me backtrack before the alarm. Okay. Okay, so now we have no volume. Oh, hang on. Yeah, that's one. Okay, great. No. Sorry, it's going to perhaps. Okay, all right. So each of these pieces lasts for quite a long time. A lot of this work is very much to do with repetitions. Okay.
Blue stone, wide-eyed party constellations, liquid lips, vocal circuit, pink thread frequencies, buzzing hands, does hips, copper belly, matter?
And then you'll see that beautiful song is by Gavin Bryars, and the singer has a lot of underground lines throughout the work, but then has this song that lasts for about 10 minutes and it really goes as a sort of troubadour love song. Okay, thank you very much.